we really just have some really not as many historical counts as we would like, but there are some pretty good ones out there. This one is one that I really like. It's H.L. Bentley out of Abilene. Was on the Prairie in 1898, this is his account from 1898, from the last 25 years that he remembered, back to 1863. And at the time, in 1863, he remembered the Prairie in central Texas scattered with very few mesquite and very few mesquite away from any streams, abundant water with annual rainfall of 20 to 35 inches out there. And it is interesting to latecomers who listen to the descriptions of the range as it appeared. One could form a poor idea of what this country was like 2 years ago from its present appearance. So even back then, they had degradation and they couldn't believe the changes that they were seeing. Stockmen traveled all the way from San Saba to Tom Green and Taylor counties in 1876. They said there was grass everywhere, 1 to 3 feet high, sometimes as high as a cow's backs in the uplands as well as in the bottoms. At that time, there was little doubt that the ranges could support 300 head per square mile, and that basically equates to a cow to 2 acres. I can't imagine that. Here in Shiner, where I grew up, we do our best to run a cow to 3 acres, and that takes a lot of fertility, and we get almost twice the amount of rainfall at times. Just pretty amazing how productive that country used to be. It's claimed by that the common average 10 years ago was 1 head of stock to 2 acres. Today, it requires at least 10 acres per head, and it's often considered not the best policy to stock more than 50 cows to a section. So even within that short time frame, they started to see some dramatic changes. 1898, it was overstocked. This overstocking of the ranges has continued year after year through good seasons and bad ones, until it was the opinion of some of the most experienced cattlemen in central Texas that the injury has gone almost beyond to the point where redemption is possible. And, we fast forward 150 years later on a lot of these prairies, and, we just didn't understand them. I mean, our forefathers tried the best they could, but they simply didn't know. And, the art of range management formed after that to protect these landscapes. Today, those lands out there in that part of the state, you're looking at probably, 25 to 30 acres to run a cow now. And if they would have had a more conservative approach back then, it might not be what we're seeing today. Here's a quote that I really like, and it is, a man who has a short pasture needs the rain much worse than his neighbor who has ample forage on his range. But when the rain comes, it does the least good for the fellow who needs it the most. So this was a E.J. Dykstra House came up with this. He was a really well-known range professional for his time. And this wisdom, is something that we see every day on our rangelands. This is a picture down in Goliad County earlier this year. I think I took this picture in June during the heat of the drought. This one side of the ranch, this side on the left was on one side of the county road. This is a ranch managed by one of our GLC ranchers. And it grew, this ranch left more grass than the ranch on the other side of the road. And what we're looking at here on that day, the temperature was, about noontime, probably 95 degrees. And our soil temperatures were 95 degrees on the left side, on the right side, 105 degrees. And look at all the bare ground. The years of continual overgrazing has really changed this soil structure on the right side versus the left. And that's what I think Dykstra House was talking about. The man who needs the rain the most got the least benefit. We can see that when that rain comes, there's not as much of a sponge to be soaked up into the soil profile, and we get short use of that rain. Additionally, the plant roots aren't nearly as developed on the right side of that on that right property. And this was in September, I believe, about the 1st of September, after we got some very, very good August rains. We were thankful to have them. And again, the ranch on the left during drought left more grass than that place on the right. And so that's the key to these prairie systems, is having healthy soil. Healthy soils develop healthy plants. And you know, we all work with some pretty broken situations, and we make our country better by growing the plants that we have to the best of their ability to develop that soil profile. And then we get the stage set, and we get the ball rolling, and we make it better. A guy that I follow from on Facebook from West Texas, he's a GLC chairman out there. Frank Price always says the faster, the better it gets, the faster it gets better. And I really believe that's the case. And that's what we see a lot of times as we develop these soils. So again, that's just kind of what we're seeing. You know, look at the water holding capacity on the left. That organic matter is probably 1 or 2% higher, and that's can really hold a lot of water. For every 1% organic matter increase, it's said that that's about an additional 16,000 gallons of water per acre. Additionally, when we have a soil that's exposed, those high temperatures, we lose soil bacteria. So when we do get our rainfall events, we have a soil that's essentially dead and has to come back to life. Whereas this ranch on the left, it's cool. It's able to use that what rainfall it gets, and those soil microbes can quickly get back in action to give those doses of fertility to those plants to quickly grow again. And this was a study that was done in South Texas a few years back, and it just showed what residue does. You know, again, having that soil covered to where you're not baking it out, losing water, from evaporation. But additionally, when you're in a covered situation, you're probably doing a good job grazing, and you got deeper plant roots. And it showed that, a ranch with only 100 pounds of residue received 16 inches of rainfall. For the year, it produced 2,000 pounds. A ranch that had 500 pounds of residue received that same amount of rainfall, and its forage production was nearly double. So just having that residue and not taking it all through grazing was a huge benefit. But what was really striking is on the right, 1,500 pounds of residue. That ranch received nearly half the amount of rainfall and still grew the same amount of grass. So again, just that ranch on the left doing all the right things, having residue and taking advantage of water. And so with these systems that we're managing, they're dynamic. And I applaud Impact for their advocacy of these prairie systems that we have. And we all know that those true remnant prairies, they're few and far between. So we've got to protect what we have, but most of us aren't in that situation. We are having to develop and rehab our land with the goal of getting it back to perhaps a tall grass state. And that takes a lot of time and effort. And so we know that these tall grasses, if we abuse them, they will revert to a mid-grass community, and then further degradation, they'll go into a brushy situation. And we can change that, of course. The cow and fire management practices are the tool to get these states transitioned to where you want it to be. At times, we have to do other what we call kind of like ecological drivers to get the system back. And we might have to replace disturbances that would have happened in the past with useful ways of applying management through brush management practices to return those states in a little bit quicker fashion. But again, here's a picture that I like. It was on the first slide of showing how these prairie systems were once productive with overstocking, drought, and without those management practices, they can turn to brush, and we can lose what we had. And with these, just picture this ball, and these states are kind of steady, but if we push it, tap it one way or the other through disturbances or management practices, we can keep the ball where we need it. And with drought or improper grazing, we can push this ball to the right from excellent condition into good condition. But with proper grazing, we can bring it right back if we're having a dry time. We can, if we're in a good condition, if we continue to overgraze, we can maybe apply a little bit of proper grazing to leave more forage out there, apply a prescribed fire. That's a good tool to get diversity back and to burn brush seedlings and to keep that invasion at bay. But sometimes, it's hard to burn on a regular basis. This part of the state historically would have burned every 3 to 5 years, maybe even more tighter than that, like every 2 to 4 years. And we simply have a rough time doing that. So, when we get a certain amount of brush invasion, we need to look at mechanical brush management practices to remove them, and then apply good grazing to bring it back. Likewise, if we're in a really degraded state, it can take quite a bit of money. That root plow, reseeding, it's an expensive practice that sometimes needs to be used. Now we're going to transition a little bit into, grazing management. And this slide, I don't expect you to get everything off of this. I just want to say that grazing management and ranch management is not rocket science. It's not rocket science. It just might be a little bit more difficult than that. And what I mean by that is, rocket scientists will shoot a rocket into space on a fixed trajectory, and if they do the math right, they're going to hit, the moon if they're shooting for it. It's a little bit more difficult with ranching. We've got changing weather conditions. We got changing markets. We've got life happens. We have family transitions that happen. And what we're going to talk about is the grazing management aspect today. And that's even can be pretty complicated at times, but we're going to talk, let's keep it simple, focus on conservative stocking and some principles to be adaptive. And the net goal is, with our grazing system that we employ, we want to keep our animal production where it needs to be to where we can maintain ranch profitability. And that takes forage quantity, quality, effective harvest, and that'll equal that animal production we need. So our two key grazing management decisions is, number one, the stocking rate. No matter what we do, if we're overstocked, we're going to degrade the resource. And then two, we can employ a grazing type system that can enhance that the forage condition, enhance the soil. And it's important to look at a grazing system, visit with an experienced rancher or one of our employees. We have good folks at Extension and other places as well that know these systems, and it's important to learn how they work, but also design one that fits your goals. And we'll get into that a little more. So with the stocking rate, it's simply matching the forage demand or the forage demand to the available supply of forage, and that changes from year to year, but we try to hit it for stock it conservatively for average type conditions. And then we have certain grazing strategies that we employ to allow our forage to recover, to keep animal performance high, and that basically maintains that soil and plant resources and also fits our lifestyle goals. The cornerstone of it, however, is just knowing how plants grow. And when you look at a plant, think of a factory, and a plant needs a lot of leaf area to really run a healthy factory to produce food for itself. 95% of what a plant needs comes from the atmosphere. And then the other 5% is from a deep root system to take in minerals and nutrients. But if we keep those plants clipped down through grazing or mowing or other disturbances, we don't have that leaf area for that plant to make food for itself. So a lot of our grazing systems are designed for whatever key species we have in that pasture, where we graze it, it gets ample recovery, and then we turn around and graze it again. And that looks different for different forage species. Something that's low growing like a Bermuda grass during really wet conditions, you'll rotate through every 21 days. But our prairie grasses a lot of times take a lot more time. They're, during wet conditions, you're looking at probably a 45-day return interval from a grazing event that is a good starting point. And carbohydrate reserves is the reason why we graze, we get out, and we allow for recovery. Those carbohydrate reserves are in the lower portions of that plant, the crowns of the plant. And at 1 week of growth rate is tied to the nutrients and water uptake in the leaf area. Plants must replenish their leaf area before they're going to go back to storing carbohydrates for that plant. So after a grazing event, it's got to regrow that leaf area before it's going to put down those food reserves for it to withstand the long term. And this was a study that was done in the 50s by Frank Kreider, where they took off leaf area on these plants, and they learned that you can take up to half of the leaf area and you don't have any root stoppage. But then once you hit or take over that 50%, it becomes a dramatic reduction. And this is what his study looked like. This is what you see. And how many of these systems do we see today, especially in drought years, do we see that are more like the right in these overgrazed situations? That's where we lose our most tall productive grasses, and what comes in are your lesser productive ones. Continued overgrazing, it gets replaced with some pretty invasive and pretty low producing plants. So this is the cornerstone of those grazing systems, and we want to be flexible so we can keep as much leaf area out there as possible. So good grazing management, here's all the pros on top. Again, you don't have to read all of them, but good grazing management is going to increase production. It's going to maintain leaf area. It's going to maintain the daily nutrition that your livestock and wildlife need. However, if you damage the resource, reduce the leaf area, long term, you can reduce your soil carbon. You can kill some of your better plants, and you're going to have a reduced growth rate, which isn't going to support the production for your livestock. And another thing is when we lose those tall bunch grasses, just think our brush species have a competitive advantage to fill in space. There's a lot of good forbs out there we want, but unfortunately, when we overgraze, we get some pretty nasty ones too that can fill in. So it's just something to think about. And when there isn't a plan, this is kind of what we're left with. There's a lot of country in the area that I work that, there's not a real plan other than I'm just going to run kind of what Granddaddy did, and no rotation at all. And we're left with a landscape that just simply doesn't hold the water that it can hold. And it's a downward spiral. So some tips for integrating grazing is, number one, look at your situation and note that at times you have to balance certain enterprises. Many folks want to balance wildlife, or they're wildlife oriented. Some are more cattle oriented. But if you want to have both, that's certainly possible. And the goal is to find some common ground at times. And with our private lands managers, y'all have a very important job of of maintaining some critical habitat for wildlife in the state. So we thank y'all for what y'all maintain. So some tips for integrating grazing into an operation is, number one, it's a skill set of a manager. Are you new or are you well seasoned? Having simple plans. Sometimes there's some other ways to incorporate different types of livestock that can add some flexibility, but there might be challenges. And like an example would be stocker type animals, younger calves that you can bring in to let them gain weight, are a valuable tool, especially during drought, but there can be times where they can be pretty challenging as well. So that takes a skilled manager. Some other tips are for flexibility is at times lease grazing. We see a lot of horror stories out there where people lease property, but it doesn't have to be done that way. You can, work with some good folks at times to develop some parameters for these grazing leases that offer flexibility, and don't stock a ranch based on, we think it can run 100 cows and that's what we always run. Well, adapt it to, paying, instead of paying a flat rate every year, it could be more of a flexible system where it's paying for an animal unit month of grazing. And it can sure help to take that financial burden off of somebody who needs to destock. They simply won't have to pay as much of a lease. And so some other tips when looking at these grazing operations is, we've got to keep ranches profitable. And at times, the best thing we can do is leverage what existing infrastructure you have. We're past the days where cows can pay for land. And some of these practices of, fencing and water development, they're good practices that to choose to do. But even today, it gets pretty tough for livestock alone to make those, to have a good return on investment to pay for some practices. So whatever you can use that you already have, that's always a good thing. And then with a grazing plan and just your ranch goals in general, it's good to have some goals that are specific, measurable, and attainable. When we develop our grazing plans to give to our clients, these are some of the things we consider. It's a very, I want to say, scientific approach, but at the end of the day, it's truly an art to put this all together, and more of an art to know how to run your livestock in a way in which you're flexible and maintaining your forage resources. But we start with a good soil map of a ranch, and a ranch might have 20 different soil types on it. We find what soils are that function the same way in terms of type of plants and the forage production those plants have, and we lump those into ecological sites. So a ranch might have 20 soils, but it might have half as many true sites that function and behave the same way. We like to map those out, and then we start looking at some factors. This is, might not be totally evident, something that we do in Lavaca, Fayette, Victoria County, but in other parts of the state, it's pretty important to look at topography, how that affects your carrying capacity. And for slopes above 10%, we need to start making reductions in the amount of forage those cattle have access to. We know that livestock don't utilize the landscape evenly. Cattle are creatures of habit. They like to go to areas that are, they like to graze around the water. They like to graze around the good shady areas, maybe hilltops where they can get a cool breeze in the summertime. They continually use those areas again because when they bite a plant, the young regrowth is palatable, and they keep on going back to that area. So this was a study that was done in the Edwards Plateau where 39% of the ranch was only used out of the whole ranch. They thought they were stocked at a count of 21 acres. Overall they were, but their effective stocking rate was really a cow to 8.2 acres. considering they're only utilizing 39% of the landscape on a consistent basis. And so this is very real, and we see this a lot on our ranches. Some of the other issues are, we have areas of heavy brush that need to be taken out and not considered grazable acres. And this was a study that was done in South Texas, where they looked at brush density scores. 0 here is an open landscape. This brush density of 1 is very light, maybe 5% brush canopy. Brush density 2, that brush is really starting to creep in. This is probably a 20 to 30% canopy. Brush density of 3, starting to get really pretty thick. Here's a 4 and a 5, nearly impenetrable when it's in 5. And what they determined was that once we start getting above a 2, the grazing really starts to slough off. So if you've got a landscape that starts getting any thicker than that, you're going to have some area that we need to consider taking out and call it non-grazable acres. Rocks in other parts of the state can be an issue, really not an issue where we're at, but something that is a factor. So when we have grazable acres, this is kind of the little formula we use. First off, we take out the slope. And like this, on this ranch example, we've got this area right here that's 10% slope. Well, then we look at distance to water. That's a factor. So anything over a mile, we're going to have some issues, right? So we have to discount that forage by half. We also have areas that simply don't grow grass that we need to figure into our grazing plans, such as roads, ponds. And when we look on a ranch basis, when we can subtract out those higher densities of brush, consider that non-grazable. We can take out our areas of rock cover, take out our roads, take out our areas of slope. And so on this ranch, we started out with 2,900 acres, but with all these discounts, and then right here in blue, this is everything more than a mile away from water. So it might be 213 acres, but really we can only count half of that available forage. That makes our total forage for this ranch 2,100 grazable acres on a 2,900 acre ranch. And then we look at where are our sites, which sites do we want to measure and determine how much forage we grow on them. Here we have our ecological sites, and we see that 83% of all of our forage are on these 3 main sites. And so when we develop a grazing plan, we'll go out and actually inventory, the sites that well represent your ranch. And we call those our key grazing areas. And those are sites we go back to and evaluate and monitor your plan. And so for this example, I'd probably measure these 2 low stony hill sites, this shallow, this steep adobe, and then 1 out here a mile away from water to kind of see what it looks like. And when we develop a grazing plan, a lot of times it is going out in the field at those key sites, and we inventory the grass. We throw out a frame, we clip it, we weigh it, we make some educated guesses on how much it's going to grow for the rest of the year. And we try to see what the total forage production is on your ranch by looking at all those factors. But, not everybody has the time that I do, with my job to go out and do those sorts of things. There's some other good tools out there that you can use. You can take out those non-grazable acres and then look at what does my forage production values need to be. A great tool is the Edit website. This is the link, Edit Horonata. Just search there. You can zoom into your ranch, and you can pull up a detailed report on, kind of like I talked in the beginning, how those prairies are dynamic between these different states. You can research your different states that your land could be in, and specifically find which one you're in today and look at what the forage production is. And it also gives some really helpful information about, what are the preferences of those plants that grow on that soil type. So for this ranch, this star here is looks like this. When we look at our eco site description, that's a midgrass prairie community, and that would be about 1,600 pounds of grass. This low stony hill, this is what that ranch looks like. This is what our description says it should look like. However, it's not that good. It's a mixture between the midgrass community and the tall grass community. And so tall grass community is 3,200 pounds, midgrass is 2,200, and come up with a production figure of 2,700 pounds per acre. And all this is important, adding up the weights of the total forage we grow on our property, because then we divide it by what our average animal demand is to see how many animals we can run. And unit based on 1,000-pound cow with a calf up to 6 months old. And what we're looking at here is finding the right size animal for your operation and dividing it by a factor to figure out how many 1,200-pound cows per se that you can run on your operation. Another factor that we really need to look into for a specific operation is how are you going to utilize the forage. And a standard way or a standard deduction we typically do on prairies in those native grasses is we say that the cows are going to eat about a quarter of the grass out there, and that leaves half of the available plant roots or leaf area available year round to have a deep root system. Now, if you have a situation where you're a little bit more adaptive and run more paddocks, at times we can get higher utilization and still keep a healthy deep plant root system. But for the most part, it's 25% when we do the initial stocking plan. And the reason we do 25% is because we want to take half and leave half of the vegetation. And to do that, 25% of it's consumed, 25% of it's lost through trampling. We have insects that come in and eat some of the forage. The cows defecate on the forage, and 25% is just lost. And that leaves the most important half, which is that 50% that leaves that healthy factory for those plants to keep those deep roots in the ground. And your productive plants can survive year to year. So that's a 25% harvest efficiency. And so when we took at all these sites and we looked at what their forage production was, whether if we clipped it or we use our descriptions to come up with that number, we're able to determine that utilizing 25% of that forage, we have our different values that add up. And for this operation or the example that I just showed you, our average stocking is 23 acres per animal unit. And then we put that into a grazing schedule. That last number I showed you is the total number a head. Well, we got to think about how we're going to employ them throughout the year. We could just turn them in one pasture and leave the place wide open and graze, 23 acres per cow, but you probably won't be happy with the results when they're sitting by that water trough or under the shade tree most of the year. We want to employ use those fences that you have, others, to put those cows in a pasture, get a efficient harvest, and then get that long 45-day rest period, maybe even longer during a drought. Let those plants recover, and we graze multiple times during the year. We graze, we get in, we get out, and us usually 3 to 4 cycles a year is a good starting point for most ranches. And the reason we do this is really because, well, it's gonna maintain our plants, and we all care about that, right? But it's simply the most profitable thing to do from a livestock production standpoint. And when you degrade your plant resources over time, you lose. It becomes more expensive to ranch. The problem is a lot of people think that ranching is like running, another business. And when you run a business, there's a certain break even point. You got to produce X amount of, let's say tires. You got to produce next amount of tires to pay for the lights and pay the taxes to keep the business open. And then from there, for every additional tire that you make, you got to bring in a little bit of rubber, have more employees. You're gonna have a point where you break even, and then from there, it's kind of, the thought is it's exponential. You bring in enough material, you're going to make profit. But with ranching, it's really not that way, because we're dealing with a finite forage resource. And so we want to stock to where we're right in the middle here, to where we're most profitable. So we can either have too many cows where we depleted the forage resource, or we're not using enough of that forage resource and we're leaving dollars on the table. And then from there, there's other ways to take pressure off your cattle from having to pay for the bills on the ranch. And that's maybe developing other resources. Developing your wildlife resources can take pressure off, increase that gross margin of profitability for the ranch. There's also other things like maybe lowering some of those fixed costs, some of those unnecessary items on your ranch. And maybe if you have 2 tractors, maybe sell one to bring more money in. And it looks like I got a question, and Mr. Brown's asking, can land be managed without feeding hay? What supplements should you be providing during the winter for winter grazing on standing dormant grass? Great question. I see ranches all the time that graze without hay, and that's because they're correctly stocked. They're conservatively stocked, following a grazing plan. And yes, most ranches typically have to feed some forage, or not forage, some protein supplement to make the cows eat dry grass during the winter, if they want to maintain a high level of production for those cows. I've seen it where people want to, sacrifice a little bit of that animal performance, and they can, if they calve in say the spring of the year, they can take a dry cow throughout winter, let her lose some body weight, and then she can quickly recover in the spring, and they can get by with less supplement. So it's definitely possible. We work plans for that with people all the time. So that's a good question. We'll look into. You'll hopefully understand that a little better as I go on. So with that, I was talking about the ranching economic part of it, but then also we need to be flexible, because our average rainfall, our average is based on a lot of extremes. But this is the rainfall data for Lavaca County, where I live, and this is over 100 years of data, and it's saying that our average precipitation is 38 inches. If we stock a ranch based on average rainfall, we can have enough grass about 50% of the time. And if we stock based on the good years only, and we don't destock in the bad times, and we run 25% more head than we need to, we're only going to have enough grass about 17% of the time. Other people, however, that are more conservative and stock for 25% below what average rainfall is, they can have enough grass 85% of the time. So Mr. Brown was asking, how do you get to where you don't feed hay? Well, you stock conservatively, so the numbers work for you to be able to make it all year without feeding hay. And that comes with herd flexibility. And there's a couple different ways of doing it. Number one, if you can run 100 cows on your place, maybe you just run 75. And so that you have enough cushion, in the good years, you don't use all your grass, and then you have some standing grass going into next year. If it's a dry year, you got a little bit of cushion to where you don't have to destock right away. And a lot of times 75 cows will make it versus 100. I know some people that also, instead of having, let's say a ranch has 100 cows, maybe they'll destock down to 75 cows, but they'll keep their calves longer in those good years. And so they really kind of are integrating a stocker system into into their operation with cattle they own. Likewise, you can be flexible by adjusting your animal numbers year to year. That takes a little bit of skill. You need to be out front monitoring your forage throughout the year to be able to do that. A good time of year to evaluate is June, usually June, July, because we've grown about half our grass for the year by June. And we like to make those decisions earlier in the year if we need to destock or not. But we can be flexible. We can sell some cull cows early during drought conditions and keep our good ones. And likewise, in a good year, maybe we integrate a stocker operation, but don't think young calves. Think of, well, maybe I go buy some older cows from somebody who's out of grass, and I put them on my property and I let them gain weight, and then I sell them back. And that's usually a good option for people because there's not much volatility in that cow price. It usually stays really consistent. But with that thought as well, consider if your neighbor's out of grass and you've got a plethora of grass, let them bring those into a pasture for a time and charge them a little bit of money to use that resource during the good times. Again, that strategy of looking at your grass throughout the year, we found a really good tool this past year, and it's called the Rangeland Analysis Platform. I would encourage you to look it up. You can just search Rangeland apps, rangeland.apps, and it's a good tool to show you historically how much forage you grow throughout different times of the year. And it can actually show a trend line of where we're at today versus where we should be. And this was a very valuable tool during the middle of the drought of knowing, hey, am I trending in the right direction? And it helps you get on top of those culling decisions early. So, this is that tool and what it can do. It helps you make those destocking decisions early. And we can go into that a little bit if y'all want to when I'm done, but we got a little bit to go yet. Some things that I like to say for prairie managers is, what does success look like? And, that picture on the left looks great. A lot of people that are, managing a pasture situation love green grass in the spring. But we know that, a pasture full of green annual grasses in the spring of the year really doesn't last all the way for standing stockpile grass for cows during the winter. This prairie system here on the right is kind of what we're shooting for. We like that dry grass, those natives, tall grasses. This is a pretty good system here of prairie grasses. A lot of little blue stem. Those red colors that time of year in the winter, those are key native grasses. That's good, right? But something to be cautious of is, more ranches go broke on green grass in the spring than brown grass in the fall. But I take it a little bit further, and I like to say success looks like green and brown year round. Again, we're talking about needing to maintain animal performance. We do that with a diversity of plants. We do that with plants that are green and actively growing. And it's good to have, forbs out there that are good for wildlife. They're more nutritious than grass at times. We like cool season grasses. We like warm season grasses growing throughout the year to maintain animal performance. And so green and brown year round is what I like. It's simple, but it also, the only way you can do this is if you're a skilled manager. This picture up top, if you're overstocked in the fall, you're going to eat all your grass. You might have a lot of, forbs and annual grasses in the spring of the year, and it looks really green, but it just doesn't last. This green and brown does over here, because this is a ranch down in southern Victoria County that in October it looked like this. This ranch it has a lot of good prairie on it that's been like that way for years because of conservative stocking. This ranch, I've done forage inventories on it. It can support a cow to 8 acres. The ranch chooses to run probably a cow to 15 acres for that flexibility during drought. You come back in April, this is what it looks like. You have these tall native grasses here. You know, those cows didn't eat all of them, and some of it is now turning brown over the winter. We did use some of it. We've got green grasses that are green annual grasses. We've got some forbs that are high nutrition for your cattle. They do well over those cows did well over the winter. And we've got plants that from last year that weren't overgrazed. They've got a lot of carbohydrate reserves. They hit the ground running in the spring, in the spring, and by next fall, you've got you've got those plants that are healthy. They're maintaining enough forage out there for your cows, and it's just a good thing. So to do that, to have that green and brown year round, you got to be adaptive. That again, that stocking rate is the key to it all. But then knowing when to move your cattle and get them in and get them out, it's important because if you don't, we change that plant community over time and don't keep it as diverse as we want it with those key prairie grasses. So number one, the first concept is, avoid severe defoliation when possible. It goes back to what we were talking about with the take half, leaf half grazing. Over time, those key natives, we lose that leaf area. We're going to lose that root volume, and those get replaced by less productive and less palatable plants. The second key concept is that grasses require recovery after defoliations, and those plants get overgrazed, or they get abused and overgrazed really by two ways. We either stay in a pasture too long and those cows keep on grazing those plants as they try to regrow, or we didn't stay out long enough and we came back too soon before that plant fully recovered. So it's good to be flexible, and maybe it's 45 days when it's growing, 60 days in the heat of the summertime. In the fall, speed it up a little bit when plants grow again. And maybe over the winter, we're just grazing stockpile, and it might be 120 days before we get back around. The timing of grazing is important because those plants, and we're managing different plants, right? We're managing warm season grasses, cool season grasses. We want to have a system of rotation. We don't want to always come back to a pasture the same time every year, or always grazing your one pasture in the fall every year, because we don't want to throw off this timing too much with how these plants grow. Plants start off in what we call kind of like this baby stage, where they've got all their leaves. It goes into a transition phase. It's kind of like the teenager phase. This phase 3 is like an old man. The plant has kind of done growing, and the plant has a predetermined amount of leaves that it's going to grow. It's just from the start. And we have what we call a growth point, and that growth point is actually is that seed head. When that plant starts to elevate, you have leaf area, and a cow can graze the top, and they won't graze that growth point because it's too low to the ground. However, when we transition, that plant starts to become more mature. That's when we want to graze it, because it's nutritious, and it has quite a bit of forage volume there to meet the nutritional intake requirements for our livestock. We want to graze there, and we typically, if we're doing it right, those cows are just taking the top third off the plant, and they're not grazing that growth point yet, but it's resetting everything, and that plant grows leaves out again. However, if those plants get too mature and they get in that old man state, that it puts up a seed head. And if we graze that plant at that point, we graze those leaves off, those leaves don't really grow back. We've got to damage that growth point, or we got to take that seed head off. That sends a hormone called auxin down to the base of the plant, and that tells it I need to grow another plant tiller again. And so these things happen throughout the year. And if we're flexible, if we're, with our grazing system, we can take advantage of keeping those plants productive, reset a lot of them, and grow more forage during the year. Likewise, if we're, we do have some plants that go to seed, and that's fine. If we always graze a pasture in the fall of the year, that same one, you won't have the big blue stem and Indian grass in there in the future like you once had, because those plants have that seed head. If you graze it in the fall of the year, it takes a lot of energy out of those plants, and they might not have enough time to fully recover. And, it reduces those carbohydrate reserves, and you have a situation where other plants might come in. So again, you're adaptive with that concept. You graze at different times throughout the year. It helps that concept of those growth points on those plants. Okay, I've got a question that came in. It said, "What is the ideal calving time?" I've heard the old timers tell me that heifers should be grazed on poor pastures to reduce calf size. Your thoughts? Ideal calving time, that's I like the idea of calving whenever the forage is of good quality and of good quality, and there's a lot, enough of it out there to meet those cow's nutritional requirements. Volume wise, a cow eats about 26 pounds of grass a day, and we want supply out there when that cow has a calf, so that way it can, maintain condition and get rebred back and calve every 12 months. That's what I like. There is some thought out there that, if I get a fat heifer, man, she's going to get too fat and that calf's going to be too big. There might be some anecdotal truth to that, but some of the research that I've read recently doesn't indicate that. It's saying keep those heifers in good performance. It might not be as big of a factor to keep them on good grass. But another concept on flexible grazing, adaptive grazing, is we have erratic periods during the year where forage grows at different growth rates. During drought, those forages might take twice as long to recover. So we need to adapt our grazing to fit that. This concept 5, animals don't utilize the landscape evenly. So we account for that in our plan number 1, and then maybe we could do some things to change that. Maybe put in some fences, develop water in different areas, feeding a mineral for your cattle in a certain area that's you not readily utilized is a great way to get those cows into a different area and change those grazing patterns. We want to be adaptive in a way that we're utilizing those forages in a productive state and then maintain good quality. Again, I've kind of hit on this. We want to graze those plants in that teenage stage, that phase 2, where they have good quality and they're productive. You reset them, they grow back leaf area. That's the way to do it to increase your productivity overall. So I'm not a big fan of one rotation per year with long rest periods in this part of the state, because our grass simply gets too rank. It loses quality, and it dries out quicker. It just doesn't have the quality for those livestock. And to maintain animal performance, I prefer multiple cycles throughout the year. Usually, one rule of thumb that I heard that works really well, I think, is for every 10 inches of rainfall, one cycle throughout the year. So think about it. If you're in far west Texas, you receive 10 inches of rain it takes a long time for those plants to recover. One cycle is probably pretty good. Here in this part of the state, 40-inch rainfall belt, 4 cycles is what I would be my starting point. In a dry year, maybe it's 3 cycles. And then number 7, increasing the number of paddocks will increase our stocking density. Will increase our stock density. That is basically a unit of measure of live animal weight per acre. So making smaller paddocks can do that, but it doesn't necessarily affect plant selection. It can or it can't, or it might not. And that's all based on timing. And that's critical because we can have the same effect of leaving the cows in one pasture for a month by moving them into a small paddock for a day. We can have that same grazing effect if we move those cows, when they need to move, taking the top third of the plant, instead of, taking the top third and moving them, we can have the same effect as a less intense grazing system. However, we can amplify things at times if we leave them in there longer and make them eat plants they normally otherwise wouldn't eat. We're making the cows select what they don't necessarily want as their first choice. If we can do that and maintain our production of our key plants over time and increase that production, we could run more cattle, but that's not something that changes overnight. And one thing to consider with these intense systems, they're a great tool to increase your rest periods and put a lot of manure in an area and increase our nutrient cycling. It's a good tool, but it takes a skilled manager, and we really amplify effects. Staying in a pasture, for let's say a normal 20-acre pasture for a month on a small place. If you stay a week longer, that could be bad. But if we size all of our pastures down to where they're small, to where maybe we only graze for a day, if I stay for a half a day, that's like staying 3 or 4 weeks extra in a bigger pasture. So we really amplify effects when we start doing these intense grazing systems. They're a good tool, but just use some caution and try to gain some experience when using them. So the key to success in all of this is that stocking rate. You can have the most sophisticated grazing system on the planet. If you're overstocked, it doesn't work. It's just rotation is useless when you're out of grass. So I hope that helped tonight. Those are some things I like to think about to maintain a flexible system, to maintain those healthy, deep-rooted plants. I've got some time if y'all want to. I can show y'all some resources to learn more about what your pastures should grow, prairie plant wise, and show y'all a little demo of the Rangeland analysis platform if that's something that would help you in determining how many cows your property can support. And I've got a question here. In which phase do you do a controlled burn? That's a good question. First off, we call these controlled burns prescribed burns because there's certain things we want to accomplish, right? We want to, change that plant community from, if it's growing a little bit too much brush, we want to get on, control some of that. So seedling plants, we can do that with fire. We set some conditions in place to do that that are a little bit more thought out and controlled. And everybody has a little bit different goals for their property. Really, using a prescribed fire is going to be different for people with wildlife objectives, that versus someone that's, that's focusing on beef cattle production. There's some general rules of thumb that, if you're wanting to get a jump start to the spring and favor grass production for your warm season grasses, winter fire, late winter, early spring fire does a good job of, killing some annual weeds and growing, getting a jump start to spring with your warm season grasses. The inverse of that is if we want to grow more forbs for wildlife, maybe we do a late summer or fall fire. We'll sprout a lot of annual forbs over the winter that'll go into the spring of year in a little bit more of a weedy type situation. And there's just a lot of things that we can look into on that. Love to visit with you. Take my phone number and we can discuss. Okay, I got Coy up. He said, can we utilize other livestock such as sheep or goats alongside of cattle to help add value to your operation in your area? Absolutely. I wish more people would do it, but I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna say that I would be doing it right away. If I had a property, it might be tough for some people to do it, and that's why a lot of people don't do it. Refencing your property with net wire fence can be pretty expensive. Also, if you don't have a good plan with some stock dogs or some predator control, they can eat you out of house and home, and really cut into your profit really quick. So if you are in a situation where you have fences and you can control predators, it's going to be ugly at first because those small ruminants have parasite issues. If you can learn how to go through that, learn how to take care of those animals, they're a great tool, because those, sheep and goats prefer forbs, which your cattle, are going to use more grasses. They'll eat the things that the cattle don't prefer. And a lot of times there's not a lot of competition there. And those sheep are a great tool to run ahead of your cows, eat those forbs out of the way, run your cows right behind them, eat the grass, have a recovery period. It works great. And then goats are even better because they eat brush, and cattle really don't utilize a lot of that resource. So good question. We got another question from Miss Ricks. If conservation is our main goal, can we use rescued donkeys in place of cattle? And is the management the same? Well, yes, the answer is yes. I mean, they're a grazing animal. The management is going to be a little bit different because they graze a little differently. Donkeys are going to graze. They got top teeth that are going to be able to graze closer to the ground. Cattle aren't as harsh at times. But if we're running the right number and moving them, they are still going to prefer the top of those plants that are most nutritious. And, we can do it in a way that can help benefit that resource. Unfortunately, most people do the opposite. They just leave them, they have too many of them. They leave them in one pasture too long, and they graze all the good stuff down to the ground. So, but it can be done. Another question: I have recently learned about enriched ag tool. Are you familiar with this, and how does it compare with Rangeland analysis tool? Okay, my understanding of enriched ag, and there's a link there. So thanks for sharing that. It's a tool that lets you look at your property, and it gives you an estimate about how much carbon your landscape can what's the word? What's the potential for it to store carbon? So sites are different. A more productive soil that holds more organic matter can hold more carbon than maybe a sandier soil type. But likewise, a site that's in really good condition might not. It'll hold more, but it's already kind of full. It could hold more, yes, but some sites that are a little more degraded, yeah, they can really start holding more carbon. And then once they start getting full, they start leveling off. And maybe enriched ag is a tool to understand your property better, to know what's the potential carbon that you can bank every year. And then you can take that and look into visiting with some folks about potential some carbon offsets. So I don't know a whole bunch of I don't know the nuances of that program. It looks really neat though. Thanks for sharing. Rangeland analysis platform is a little different. It's more of a forage production and forage production tool, and it's also a tool that shows our changes in brush canopy over time. And Gary, are there differences in management with natives, improved, and invasive grasses? Yes. Yes, but no, I guess you could say. I mean, all these adaptive principles, they're important for all these grasses. There's native grasses that'll function like Bermuda grass, and the fact that they're shorter statured plants, they have their growth points lower to the ground, or there's multiple growth points that they can take frequent grazing more often, and they're low growing to the ground, and they might recover a little bit quicker than our tall grasses. Our tall grasses have those, they start to elevate their growth points. After a grazing event, they need more time to recover. We have some introduced forages that some of them are invasive, like King Ranch blue stem, and some of our other old world blue stem plants can be pretty invasive. They function a little bit more like a native plant with their growth points, but not completely. I mean, some of them have multiple growth points, but they take a little longer to recover than Bermuda grass from a grazing event. So really the key is looking at what you want to grow and manage for it. Manage for what you want, don't manage for what you don't want. If you want to grow tall grasses, you can just have a few of them out there, focus on conservative stocking and moving when those plants have been grazed, and then don't return until they're recovered. A good rule of thumb on our tall grasses are, you're going to turn in and graze on them at probably 16 inches or more. And then when they get down to about 12 inches, we need to get the livestock out of that pasture and let those plants recover. Mid grasses, you might turn in at 12 inches and graze it down to, 6 or 8 inches. Bermuda grasses, you're going to graze down, or things like buffalo grass, that's a native grass. You'll graze it at 6 inches, and once it hits 3 inches, it's time to move. So, and those plants recover at different rates. So pick what you want to manage for, try to mimic that rest period for that plant, and hopefully we start to see increases in those. It's not perfect. We're not going to get all of one thing, and we're not supposed to. These prairies are dynamic, and there's a diversity of plants. We're not going to see exactly what we want right away. And it takes time, and Mother Nature reacts and grows what she needs to grow at times. For tall grasses, this thing's kind of blocking it. I'm sorry, Gary, I can't see that whole question. Can you for tall?
Hey, Matt, you want me to read it for you?
Yes, please.
So it says, for tall grasses, is root structure lost during winter?
Is root structure lost during the winter?
Yes. Grass goes dormant, turns brown in winter. Is it losing root structure as if it was being grazed, or is the root structure just being maintained during the winter?
It's usually maintained over the winter. Now, that being said, if we kept half our plant material out there over the winter, we should have at least a deep root system in the ground. That study is, that's part of the story, but it's not the entire story. So the leaf area is important, but also there's crowns of the plant that store some carbohydrates as well. And so over the winter, it's not a free-for-all. You can't just graze, oh, we hit frost, now I can graze all of it. That's not the case, because we don't want to graze those plant crowns because they store some carbohydrates. And also, if we take too much of that litter off the ground, one of the first slides I showed was litter covering the ground. That litter reduces soil temperature. It helps hold water. You're going to grow more grass year to year if you leave some plant litter. So over the winter, it's not a free for all. We got that litter helps us year after year keep the ground covered. And if we keep the ground covered, we grow more forage biomass. If we shortchange that country and take it too short every winter, we run out of forage supply. And then over time, we start running with short roots throughout the growing season, and it's a downward spiral. So unless we're flexible with our animal numbers. So that's a great question. And, yeah, you can graze a little harder during winter at times, but still try to leave those key grazing heights for those grasses. Again, short grasses shoot for 4 inches, mid grasses 6 inches, and 12 inches on your tall grasses are going to keep you in good shape. Okay, Matt, we have to sign off, but wanted to give you thanks. So that was extremely helpful. So are we at a time limit?
There's no time limit. It's kind of just, I'm gonna,
Okay.
It's whenever people leave, I guess.
I got you. Okay. So yeah, thanks for joining us. Yeah, I get it now. You have to sign off. So let me just show y'all a couple of resources real quick. If my computer will, okay, here we go. First off is this edit tool. If you just Google search edit Horonata, it takes you to a pretty neat little tool that'll pull up the descriptions for your property. You can learn more. They have this tool that it has a map. You can zoom into your property. It tells you what resource area you're in, and you can actually zoom into your map on a particular piece, click on it. It'll tell you what site it is. And right here we have what we call a clay loam site. You can download a report. It kind of looks like this.
Hey, Matt, I don't think, or I can't see it. I don't know if anyone else can see it. Right now, all I see is the further assistance still. I don't know if that's just me though.
No, I bet I need to share it in a different way. I'm gonna share this screen. Okay, now can you see it?
Yep, now we got it.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Jake. So I'm gonna step back. Sorry about that. This edit Horonata tool, it has a resource that allows you to pull a map for your property. You can zoom in, you can click on a soil type. It tells you what your ecological site is, and you can download a report that's about 30 pages of information of what your soil types are, how they were formed, what plants they produced. This right here shows those different states of those plant communities that you could be in and how you can return them back to where you want them to be. Or, what are the practices you can put in place to improve your property. And then from there, it gives you some great examples of what the prairie would have looked like historically with the production values, and then it shows what it might look like today or how it can change to meet your goals. And then it has a detailed plant list that'll tell you what should be growing on that site, or what the potential is for it to grow on the site, I should say. And it's just a good tool. So I don't think y'all can see that. So I apologize.
We're seeing it.
Okay, some of y'all are seeing it.
We're seeing the pages, but we don't see the URL.
Okay, let me go back to.
Not yet. Can you go? Is it at the very top?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah, I see it now. Okay, I'm going to get a picture.
Okay.
Maybe.
Well, I need to stop clicking around. I apologize.
I lost it. There it is.
Hey, Matt, can you put that URL link in the chat?
Yes, I can.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, I think I got it.
Okay, that's basically your way to get those soil reports and those plant descriptions for what your property has the potential to grow. And now I'm going to transition into the rangeland analysis program. This is another one that I would like for y'all to use if possible. Let me. I'm gonna put this one in here in the URL in the chat. Rangeland.apps. It has this thing called a production explorer, and you can hit this launch production explorer. And you can map your property and see what your average forage production has been for up to 20 years. What that production is. You select a feature that says draw a feature. Has an interactive map to where you can zoom into your property. We'll pick a place down the road that I'm kind of familiar with. Turn it to a satellite map. And then I draw a polygon by hitting this square box. I'm sorry, I'm going to draw a polygon instead of a square around a particular piece of property. Hit finish. And it has a report, a feature that says calculate time series. Takes a little bit of time. And within a few minutes, not even a few minutes, we can get a good estimate snapshot of what the average forage production has been on a piece of property. Earlier tonight, when I was showing y'all clipping and weighing grass, that's what I do a lot, and I love to do it. This tool is pretty close to that at times. So this is pretty interesting. This shows that this property, this is the forage production during this dry year, what it's been. Cumulative forage production is below normal. This is the normal production. This is 25% of production, 75% of normal, 125% and 150%. So it showed we had a pretty rough drought in this part of the state. This is good if you're looking at June and seeing, are we on track to have enough grass? You can go to historical production. It shows you what your long-term average forage production has been. And this ranch here has a lot of weesatch in the middle of it, and it used to be more productive than it is today because of that. And then what's cool is it has a stocking rate tool that you can say, I'm grazing for a full year. I can put in a cow size that's realistic. So a 1,200 pound cow grazing 2.6% of her body weight with a 25% harvest efficiency, which is a good planting tool for prairie grasses. It calculates stocking rate. And it shows that I can run 6 cows on this 80-acre property. Well, I'm sorry, eight head on here as the average. And it gives me a nice little report saying, you know, about a cow to 15 acres. So it's a pretty neat little tool that literally took 2-3 minutes to give you a good starting point for stocking your property. So I think with that, that's kind of what I wanted to show y'all. They also, with this wrap tool, it has a way to look at forage forage and brush changes over time. So that's another interesting feature as well. So let me pull up my chat. I don't see anybody else. I really appreciate y'all joining in. Let me type in my email address for y'all. And y'all have a good evening.